On the day we moved into our new house, I expected the start of a new chapter in our lives, but an unexpected event awaited me. As soon as we finished moving in, another large truck quietly stopped in front of our house. I became a bit anxious and asked my husband, "Is this truck ours?" Then the words my husband cheerfully uttered reached my ears. "Actually, from now on, my parents will live here with us." What, really? Why? I was so surprised that I couldn't find the words to respond. My in-laws went further and said, "If you oppose, we don't need such a daughter-in-law. You can't even show respect for us." At that moment, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Does this mean our married life is over?" I asked while laughing. "Huh?" My husband looked confused. This is the moment I, just after moving into our new house, realized there was a big gap between me, my husband, and my in-laws. I, Samantha, a housewife in my 30s, have been married to Victor for 5 years, and we have a lovely 4-year-old son. Initially, I quit my job to focus on the family. But now that our son is a bit older, I've started working again, full-time on weekdays. When I first met Victor, he was very kind and a bit laid back, which I found charming. Above all, I was moved by how he always put me first, which led me to decide on marriage. However, over time, some issues emerged between me and Victor's family. They cared too much about appearances, prioritizing their reputation over others' feelings. This was especially evident during our wedding preparations. They insisted on a grand ceremony, saying, "It's the eldest son's wedding, so it must be grand." I wanted a small, intimate celebration with close friends and family. But my in-laws wouldn't allow it. They argued that a modest wedding would be embarrassing and tarnish the family's honor. Victor's family is not particularly prestigious. His father is just a retired office worker, and his mother is a stay-at-home wife. Their home is just a mere rental, not fancy at all. Yet, they place great importance on how they're perceived externally. They eventually declared they would cover the ceremony costs, unilaterally booking a familiar venue. To avoid premarital conflicts, I reluctantly agreed to their plan, only to later realize it had placed a significant burden on my family. The groom's side, my in-laws, only covered their expenses, leaving my family to bear the rest. And during childbirth, the words my mother-in-law uttered while I was in labor painfully highlighted their values. The baby isn't born yet?" I rushed over thinking I'd meet them already. This is a bit boring. Maybe I'll have some coffee while waiting," she casually complained beside my hospital bed. While I was in pain, my mother-in-law relaxed beside me as if at a tea party. "Samantha, are you listening?" She casually spoke to me, enduring pain. Even then, Victor was just an onlooker. He could have shown a bit more consideration. I was once attracted to his laid-back nature, but now it just seemed like insensitivity. Perhaps for him, his parents' behavior was completely normal. And this insensitivity continued after our son was born. Leaving me alone immediately after our son's birth, his parents, calling it a celebration, held a late-night party at our home, demanding snacks and drinks. Even when our son cried, no one made an effort to soothe him. That's why I kept a distance from my in-laws, maintaining only minimal contact. However, there came a time when we inevitably had to engage closely with them. We, a family of 3, were living comfortably in a rented apartment, but as our son grew, we started considering buying a house. Building a house is not just a decision. It's a major undertaking. It starts with finding a land, selecting a construction company, and involves countless meetings right down to the details of the interior. Both of us working, our weekdays were busy. So the meetings for the house were concentrated on weekends. Since it was challenging to take our son to long meetings, we often left him with my parents. But the day before our next meeting, my mother called to say she caught a cold and couldn't take care of him to avoid passing it on to him. When I discussed it with Victor, he suggested, "Why don't we leave him with my parents for a change?" I was reluctant to rely on my in-laws, but Victor didn't wait for my response and called them saying, "Can we ask you to take care of him for a day? Don't worry, it's just for one day. We'll bring a souvenir." Despite my apologies for the sudden request, Victor assured, "It's fine, they'll just look after him for a day," and ended the call. That moment planted a seed of anxiety in me. The next morning, we took our son to my in-laws and headed to our meeting. We bought sweets on the way back for them, appreciative yet eager to leave. As anticipated, my in-laws detained us, inquiring excitedly about the house. "Are you building a single or two-story house? Perhaps one of those trendy garage houses? Are you getting a system kitchen? It must make cooking so convenient for the younger generation. I'd probably cook more if I had one." My mother-in-law joined in with interest. Victor responded, "Samantha decided on the kitchen since I don't cook." Hearing this, my mother-in-law expressed a longing wish to try out the new kitchen. Trying to maintain a pleasant atmosphere, I suggested, "Why don't you consider updating your kitchen too?" However, she replied, "We don't have the money for that. If you're offering, I'd love a renovation." Victor casually said, "Once our house is built, come over. You can even try the kitchen." The kitchen is like a sanctuary to me, and the thought of others using it felt intrusive. After enduring more house-related questions, we were finally freed 2 hours later. On the way home, I shared my concerns with Victor. "Your parents seem very interested in our house, but they're not planning to live with us, right?" He reassured, "No, the house is for our family, and the kitchen is for you to use however she likes." Trusting his words, I calmed down. Since then, my in-laws became more involved in our house planning, offering to watch our son during meetings and suggesting various design ideas. "Show me the blueprint, let me give you some advice," my father-in-law would say, inquiring about the bathroom and living room sizes. He even advised on future-proofing the house. "It's good to have handrails at the entrance for when you're moving things around." My mother-in-law suggested a guest room would be calming and inquired about the kitchen sink height, too high, and it'll be hard to cook if you hurt your back. Their involvement grew, with advice on even the tiniest details. When I explained about the height of the sink, my mother-in-law immediately remarked, "This is a bit inconvenient for me to use." She advised, "It would be better if it were a bit lower." "It doesn't suit my height," to which I inadvertently responded, "I designed it to be most convenient for me." Hearing this, my father-in-law joined in, asserting, "The house isn't just for you alone. Victor will use it too, so it needs to be convenient for everyone." Though he said it's for everyone, I couldn't help but think, do I have to change everything just for the occasional visits of my in-laws? I glanced at Victor for support, but he just silently nodded. I began to wonder, for whom are we really building this house? With such exchanges recurring, my spirit wore down. I approached Victor, suggesting, "Let's stop leaving our child with your parents and ask them not to interfere with the new house discussions." However, Victor didn't see my point, saying, "They are doing us a favor when they look after our son. What's the big deal if they give some input? Aren't you overreacting?" I pressed further, "But don't you think your parents are pushing their opinions too much? Are they planning to live with us?" Victor suddenly got angry and shouted, "How many times do I have to say it? The house is for our family. If you keep nagging about this, we might as well divorce." I was confused. How did a discussion about the new house lead to talks of divorce? From then on, Victor started to threaten divorce over trivial matters. On another day, my in-laws visited and reignited the conversation about the new house. "Shouldn't we rethink the location of the bathroom?" my father-in-law suggested, and my mother-in-law agreed. Yes, this way would be more convenient. Victor was ready to call for changes, aligning with their opinion. When I firmly stated, "This part is already decided," my father-in-law became irritated. "It's not your place to speak. You should respect the opinions of your elders," he scolded loudly. My mother-in-law added subtly, "We're saying this for your own good." Yet, there was a coldness to her words. With no support from Victor, who lightly remarked, "They're just trying to help. Why not listen a bit?" My father-in-law turned to Victor and said, "Couldn't you have found a more understanding woman?" Victor responded, "Don't say that, Dad. Samantha, apologize. Otherwise, we're heading for divorce." I could only respond with disbelief. Internally, I felt at my limit. The relationship with my in-laws was always challenging, but recently Victor has become increasingly submissive to them. The kind Victor I knew was gone, replaced by a husband under his parents' influence. The excitement of building a new home had turned into daily heartache from interactions with my in-laws. Any complaints to Victor were met with threats of divorce. At one point, he even showed me a filled-out divorce form. "Why are you so cold?" "My parents are just trying to give advice, thinking of us. They take good care of our son, don't they? If you keep this up, I'm seriously considering divorce," Victor began to say. I was stunned. It was clear he would always side with his parents. Their care for our son was minimal. My parents were the true support, responding to sudden calls from daycare and caring for our son when I was sick. While my parents prepared birthday and Christmas gifts, my in-laws never presented a gift to our son, yet they always demanded something from us during visits. Victor wasn't seeing the reality of our family. Exhausted, I fled to my parents' home. Seeing my state, my mother immediately sensed something was wrong and kindly asked, "What's the matter? Are you troubled by something?" After I confided everything to her, she said, "You can always come back here." Her words lightened my heart. Indeed, I didn't need to force myself to fit in with that family. It was just a matter of making a decision. But my concern was our son. We just built a new house, envisioning a happy future there. But my in-laws' interfering increased, and it felt like it wouldn't be long before they took over the house. The thought of being constantly targeted and used by them was unbearable. Yet, if I suggested divorce, Victor would surely refuse. Despite often mentioning divorce, his family cared about appearances, so I doubted it would go smoothly. Thus, I started preparing for a possible situation. Finally, our new house was completed. When the three of us went to see it, our son was thrilled, running around the new space. Surrounded by the new house's scent, I felt the reality of achieving our ideal home. Victor and I discussed the moving details. The plan was to leave the second floor, designated for the guest room and our son's room, empty for a while, using it as temporary storage. I shared this plan with Victor, but he only responded, "Make sure to organize the stuff," while saying, "Why rush?" I already had a suspicion. Then the moving day arrived. After leaving our son with my parents, I immersed myself in unpacking alone. But soon, I noticed Victor was missing. When I found him, he was on a call saying, "What? You're coming now? But we're still unpacking." I sighed internally. "Your parents again?" Soon, another truck stopped in front of our house. I thought it was a forgotten item, but when the doorbell rang, my in-laws were there, carrying their belongings. My father-in-law entered briskly, asking, "Is everything unpacked?" Then glanced around and remarked, "Oh, it's not organized at all. It must have been hard for you, Samantha, to do this alone." Behind him, movers stood with large protective covers, politely asking, "Hello, is it okay to start the work here?" Confused, I thought. What work are they talking about? My in-laws quickly instructed the workers to begin, and they invaded our new home. I asked Victor urgently, "What's going on?" He replied, "Actually, we're going to live together now. My parents have always helped us a lot, especially with our son, so it's more convenient." I wasn't aware of this plan. I objected, to which he said, "I'm the head of this household. My parents have always advised us on the house. Mom is looking forward to living here." "Wait, this house is for us and our son. There was no plan for your parents' rooms," I argued. Then, my father-in-law demanded, "The largest room on the second floor will be mine." My mother-in-law added, "And the room next to it will be mine. I wonder if the curtains I measured will fit." In confusion, I asked Victor, "Isn't this the first time your parents are visiting our house?" He revealed, no, they had been here before the viewing. "Why?" I inquired, to which he replied, "They wanted to see the house first, so I gave them the keys." At that moment, anger surged within me. I couldn't believe that my in-laws had inspected the house we put our hearts into and even decided on their rooms without us. "Why didn't you consult me? This is our family's home. I can't accept that our son's room will be taken away." I strongly protested to Victor. He retorted, We won't use his room or the guest room right away, right? The guest room is for when someone visits, isn't it? So what's the difference if my parents use it? He continued, didn't we agree to live with a family? That family includes my parents. Was I deceived? I asked in shock. Victor firmly stated, you're the one who was mistaken. I'm the head of the house, so no complaining. Then my in-laws chimed in. What's wrong with her? Is it such a problem for us to live together? Quite presumptuous for a daughter-in-law. My father-in-law criticized. It's natural for children to take care of their parents, isn't it? You're part of our family, so it's natural for you to take care of us. My mother-in-law added. But we built this house for our family to live in. Even the kitchen was designed for me to use, I counted. You will do the housework, right? So there's no problem, my mother-in-law stated. A daughter-in-law doing household chores is only natural, my father-in-law added. So, you're saying you won't do any housework? I questioned. Of course. What a noisy daughter-in-law. Victor, you don't need such a wife. Divorce her. My father-in-law shouted. Victor also declared, don't talk like that to my parents. We really will get a divorce. There it was, the mention of divorce. So, you're considering divorce, aren't you? Huh? At the moment, I couldn't help but laugh. We're practically divorced already, aren't we? I said, while Victor and his parents looked shocked. We're not legally divorced yet, I mentioned, presenting the filled-out divorce papers to him. What's this? Victor exclaimed. The divorce papers you handed me while saying I'll divorce you. Don't you remember? I retorted. That was a joke, he claimed, but I challenged, threatening divorce every day. And it's a joke? We're a couple, aren't we? Just a joke, he tried to explain. I could only respond with a bitter smile. I've never heard of someone considering threats as jokes. Plus, I've recorded everything you've said, all your threats, I announced. Victor, in shock, exclaimed, What? Yes, I'm taking these recordings to a lawyer. We're getting a divorce, I declared. Victor, now panicked, asked, But what about this house? I wanted a happy life here with you and our son. But it seems you didn't. Go ahead, live here with your parents, I stated. Then I added, once we're divorced, return the $50,000 I contributed as down payment. And don't forget about child support. I'll be raising our son. With that, I took out a cardboard box I had prepared in advance. Inside were bags and backpacks filled with mine and my son's belongings, prepared just in case. Knowing that my in-laws were trying to take over the house and that Victor was complicit, I realized that divorce was my only option. However, Victor, who was concerned about appearances, wouldn't agree to a divorce quickly. The divorce papers were prepared by Victor, but I decided to use them. He might think it's just a threat, but since he had already filled them out, I used them to my advantage. However, I had to confirm his intent to divorce to avoid the divorce being invalidated, so I also made recordings. He probably thought I didn't have the courage to divorce him, especially with a young son involved. But I'm not alone. My parents support me, and I can't imagine what would happen to my son if we continued living with his family. Therefore, the best option was to divorce and leave. My parents have supported me and welcomed my son and me. This is your home, they told me as I arrived with my belongings. At the lawyer's office, I submitted the recorded data and the divorce papers to formally start the divorce process. Over the next week, Victor contacted me multiple times, but my decision was firm. I believe it was the best choice for my son and me. While I avoided Victor's calls, numerous messages were left on the answering machine, mainly about the house mortgage, with no mention of our son, apologies, or his parents. It seemed Victor was more concerned about the mortgage than the issues with his parents. No surprise there. Victor had no savings, often spending on hobbies like casinos and slot machines. The money actually used for the house was solely my savings from before our marriage. Although Victor said, "Don't worry, I'll put the mortgage under my name," I didn't trust his naive thinking. That's why I had him sign a loan agreement for $50,000, stating he borrowed this amount from me and would repay it. To Victor, borrowing money between spouses might not have seemed like a big deal, as he signed without complaint. This loan agreement became crucial just in case. Even though we used my savings for the down payment and the mortgage was in Victor's name, he likely depended on my income too. He probably intended to make me bear the living expenses after his parents moved in. I'm sure his thrifty parents wouldn't contribute to the living costs either, but I had already decided to divorce. As long as I received the money I gave him and child support, that was enough for me. I had no desire to speak with his family again, leaving all procedures to my lawyer. I submitted the loan agreement, intending to demand full repayment. I was prepared for a request to pay child support in installments, but due to their pride, they chose to settle it in one go to sever ties with me quickly. How they managed to arrange the funds, I do not know, but that's no longer my concern. A new future with my son awaits me. I was surprised by their decision, but learning they gave up living in the new house and chose to sell it gave me a sense of closure. Without me, the loan payments became a burden for them along with their dubious debts. Victor and his parents started a new life in a small apartment, facing financial difficulties. My mother-in-law, who had dreamed of a system kitchen, was deeply disappointed that her dream wouldn't come true. The kitchen, designed for my convenience, would have been too high for her, adding to her frustration. Moreover, the situation became even more complicated when the divorced sister-in-law and her children returned to Victor's parents' house. The addition of the unemployed sister-in-law, who had no desire to work, and her two sons, a middle schooler and an elementary schooler, made the house even more cramped. With only Victor's income and the meager pensions of his parents, their living situation became extremely difficult. With Victor burdened by debt repayment, their household finances were always in dire straits. There were constant complaints from neighbors about the never-ending arguments within the family. My sister-in-law complained that they were supposed to live in the new house, while my mother-in-law lamented the loss of the chance to use her dream system kitchen. Victor, frustrated, dived deeper into gambling, saying, "If you complain so much, I'll hit it big and buy a house or whatever," only increasing his debts. Rumors even surfaced that he borrowed more money from loan sharks, casting a shadow over their future. But this is all due to Victor, who always sided with his parents, so it's his own fault. I distanced myself from their life, starting anew with my son. Living in a rental apartment near my workplace is refreshing, and I find new energy in both my work and home life. When I come home late, my parents support me by taking care of my son, which gives me peace of mind. As I worked hard, I achieved results and improved my income. Thanks to this, I am planning a relaxing trip to a hotel with spa with my son and parents. My family is irreplaceable to me. Freed from the days of being manipulated by Victor and his parents, I'm now expressing my gratitude to my parents, who have always supported me, feeling the true happiness of family. Standing firmly on my own feet, I look forward to forging a new future with my precious family. I'll hand over the house to my parents. If you resist, I'll divorce you. I wonder what this person was talking about. Daniel was smiling as he spoke to me, who was sunk in sorrow after losing my mother. Hearing him, I realized that my love for him had vanished. Instead, anger towards him and my in-laws welled up in me. "Fine, but you'll regret it. Shut up. Fools should keep quiet." He didn't seem to take my words seriously, handing me the completed divorce papers while laughing. If he was serious, I needed to show my seriousness too. I would make him regret underestimating me. Smirking, I took the divorce papers and left the house. I headed to my uncle's house. The next day, I went with my uncle to the luxurious house occupied by my in-laws. "Where were you yesterday?" "It's not okay for a maid to just disappear." "Maid? Who are you talking about? Who else but you?" "You're the wife. Actually, we're already legally divorced." Daniel was confused by my reply. Seeing this, my uncle started to speak. "I have some legal advice to seek about this matter. I, Gina Simpson, am a 35-year-old part-time housewife. I don't have a father. He died in an accident when I was young. So, my mother raised me alone. She had a talent for business and built a large company by herself. Because I'm a single mother, I don't want you to suffer financially, Gina. I have to live long for both you and your father. Mother always said that, dedicating herself to her business. As a result, there were no financial worries. Sis, Gina, I came to see you since I'm in the area for work. Oh, thank you for your hard work even on your day off. Yes. Oh, where's that heavy package you said was hard to carry? I'll help with that too. Additionally, my uncle, my mother's brother, supported us despite his busy work. However, our family had rules. Take care of yourself. Earn what you want through your own efforts. Mom, I want something, so can I get a part-time job? Of course. What do you want? There's a book I need for a qualification I want to take in the future. Oh, Gina, you're really admirable. Therefore, I always spared no effort. My mother always praised me for that. As a result, I eventually played an important role at the company. I fell for you the first time I met you, and I was increasingly drawn to your hardworking nature. I met my husband, Daniel, at the company. He persistently approached me, and I was gradually drawn to his passionate attitude, leading to marriage. We don't have children yet and lead a typical life. One day, work meetings ran late, and I came home after working overtime. Finally back? I'm hungry, so hurry up and serve dinner. When I arrived home, Daniel was lounging on the sofa with his smartphone, not even greeting me. Sighing in frustration at his attitude, I said, I messaged you that I'd be late today, so you should eat first, right? Oh, did you? I sent it, and you even replied, got it. Then hurry up with dinner. Saying that, he laid himself back on the sofa as usual. Unlike me, he doesn't hold a special position. He's a typical employee. That's why I wanted him to help with the housework, but he always ignored it. He leaves his clothes on the floor and doesn't clean up after meals. He used to be considerate and help with housework in the early days of our marriage. Hey, I just returned tired from work. Compared to that, you're just relaxing on the sofa, so at least prepare your own meal. Stop nagging. You're just a failure at infertility treatment. I felt outraged by his words. It's true we don't have children, but it's not solely my fault. We both have difficulty conceiving. That's the same for you. It's your fault. We don't have kids because your body is faulty. Yet, Daniel blames everything on me. He probably feels his pride hurt as I hold a position while his career stagnates. In other words, jealousy and spite. That's a separate issue. What about you, who does neither housework nor work properly? What? Are you mocking me? That day, we had a big fight. Angry, Daniel went to bed without eating anything. His attitude confused me. Considering all my efforts, I couldn't understand Daniel's behavior. What should I do? While heating up the food in the fridge, I muttered to myself. The next morning, on a rare day off with no plans, I woke up a bit later than usual. Daniel. He's not here. I couldn't see Daniel, who usually sleeps until noon. He must have gone to his parents' house. With that thought, I got ready and headed to the hospital. Mom, hello. Oh, Gina. You're off today? Yes. How are you feeling? Well, as usual. My mother collapsed at work around that time and was then hospitalized. Knowing her, she must have felt ill before collapsing but continued to work, leading to her current state. Even then, she was working on her laptop in her hospital bed despite not feeling well. How about you? No problems. I smiled in response to her worried question. I didn't want to worry her further. By the way, the maple trees near the company are beautiful again this year. I took some photos. Want to see? Yes, show me. Changing the topic, I showed her the pictures. After a pleasant conversation with her, I left the hospital. I have a message from my mother-in-law. Checking my phone, there was a message from Daniel's mother. Reluctantly, I decided to respond. It's about time. Where have you been? I was at my mother's hospital. What? Prioritizing your own parent over your husband is unacceptable. I felt irritated by the shouting voice coming from the phone. As expected, Daniel had gone to his parents' house. Her complaints continued. Why do you trouble Daniel? As a wife, you should respect your husband. Are you getting carried away because of your position? And you don't even have children due to infertility. I wish he would become independent. Daniel always runs quickly to his parents' protection. It's really pathetic. Thinking this, I responded vaguely and ended the call. What's wrong, Gina? You look upset. Oh, uncle. Are you here to visit mom too? Something like that. My uncle, who had been watching from somewhere, approached me. Behind him stood a man. Uncle, is that gentleman a work acquaintance? Yes, he might be involved in something that affects you, so I'll introduce you. I'm James Miller. Pleased to meet you. He handed me his business card and I gave him mine. Then my uncle said, I have something to discuss with my niece, so could you go ahead to the hospital? What was the call about? It was from my mother-in-law. I explained the situation with a wry smile. Daniel neglects housework and runs to his parents' house at the slightest conflict. And his mother defends him and blames me for being infertile. Hearing my story, my uncle looked troubled. I want to keep this from mom. I don't want to worry her more. Understood. My uncle nodded, looking somewhat distressed, and I parted ways with him. Then it happened shortly after. What, Mom? When I rushed to the hospital after hearing my mother's condition had worsened, she had already passed away. Stunned by the sudden loss, I stood there in a daze. Unable to think of anything, my uncle supported me and even arranged the funeral. We did it. Now the inheritance is ours. Really? She was the CEO of a major company, right? How many millions in inheritance is there, I wonder? The wife's inheritance belongs to the husband's family. We can say goodbye to that shabby house. The laughter, inappropriate for the occasion, snapped me back to reality. I heard Daniel and his parents laughing and talking loudly at the funeral. Everyone, please leave. My uncle, seeing me frozen and disturbed by their words, kicked them out of the funeral. Though Daniel and his parents tried to resist, they left the funeral venue, criticizing my uncle, under the cold stares of those around. Gina, if you ever want to cut ties with them, just let me know. Thank you. Afterward, unable to bring myself to return to Daniel's house, I decided to stay in my mother's grand mansion for a while. The house, built with love by my mother, was filled with many memories. Planting flowers in the garden for my mother's comfort, playing hide and seek in this large house on weekends. Even though my mother was busy with work, she always valued our time together. Being in the house reminds me of such happy days. Feel free to use this house when I'm gone. My mother had said that during her lifetime. As I considered making the house my own, the doorbell rang. It could be my uncle, worried and coming to check on me. Since my childhood, my uncle often visited without notice, so I opened the front door. So you were here after all, Daniel. And, wow, what a fabulous house. Wait a minute. The unexpected visitors were Daniel and his parents. Confused by their unanticipated arrival, they entered the mansion. They even brought moving boxes, one after another being brought inside. What are you doing? This is my mother's house. But your mother is gone now. Right now, this is my house. No, this house is in my parents' name. I was shocked by his words. Why was my mother's inheritance in his parents' name? A lawyer friend of ours changed the ownership. What? How could you do this without permission? Quiet down. A wife's belongings belong to her husband's family. Don't worry, you can work here as a maid. Daniel said this mockingly. I'll hand over the house to my parents. If you resist, I'll divorce you. Daniel could say such things without a care. He said this to me, who was mourning my only mother, with a laughter. And then, I realized I no longer felt any love for him. Instead, anger towards Daniel and his parents welled up in me. Fine, but you'll regret it. Quiet fool. He seemed not to take my words seriously, handing me the completed divorce papers with a laugh. If he was serious, then it was time for me to be serious too. I needed to make him regret underestimating me. Smiling, I took the divorce papers and left the house. My destination was my uncle's house. What an insult. I've been taken for a fool. I immediately consulted my uncle, who is a lawyer. Changing ownership like that is not allowed legally. It's an impossible act. Yet, he had a lawyer do such a thing. Don't worry, I'll protect your mother's house. And you, Gina? That's what my uncle told me. We immediately took action. My sorrow over losing my mother had completely turned into anger towards them. I could never forgive that unreasonable family. The next day, I went with my uncle to the mansion they were occupying. Where were you yesterday? It's not okay for a maid to just disappear. Maid? Who are you talking about? Who else but you, the wife? Actually, we're already legally divorced, I said calmly, and Daniel's expression froze in shock. He was at a loss for words, unable to believe it. Then my uncle spoke. I have something to discuss with you as a lawyer. My uncle looked at Daniel coldly. I had quickly filled out the divorce papers I received the day before and completed the legal procedures. Informing Daniel of this fact, he was clearly bewildered. His face showed an inability to comprehend the situation. What's happening? Daniel's parents asked, increasing the tension. My uncle calmly intervened to resolve the situation. His voice was composed, carrying the weight of a lawyer. We need to discuss this situation from a legal perspective, he said, gazing intently at Daniel. My uncle explained that I was the legal owner of the house and spoke in detail about the illegality of changing the ownership. Changing the ownership of this house illegally is prohibited by law. Daniel's parents tried to argue. That was done by a lawyer we know. So it can't be illegal. Could you please give me the name of the lawyer? This case may constitute a clear case of forgery of private documents. My uncle's question carried a legal seriousness. At this moment, Daniel lashed out at me. What are you doing on your own? I responded calmly. The one who started this without permission is you, isn't it? I haven't done anything against the law. I can call the police. Daniel had nothing to reply and remained silent. His silence made me understand why he couldn't succeed in his career. That infertile woman. His words were weak. I confidently retorted. You say that, but I think I'm better off than you. In reality, I still have a chance to conceive. Whereas I have a hope of pregnancy through treatment, Daniel has been told by doctors that it's difficult for him to have children. I still have a chance to have children, but you don't. You can't have children, can you? Such audacity. You have insulted the precious memories I had with my dear mother, and I will never forgive that. As I looked straight into Daniel's eyes, he hung his head. My uncle had also demanded silence from his parents. Leave this house immediately, and be prepared for what's to come. Under our cold gaze, they trembled. They had trampled on the precious home of my mother and me, and they needed to pay the price. My sister knew about the situation you were in. It seemed my mother had sensed my troubles and asked my uncle to help me. She probably won't tell me anything to avoid worrying me, so please help her in my stead. I heard these words from my uncle. It turned out that after my mother's death, Daniel had been bragging about getting his hands on the inheritance. My mother had prepared a will to protect her estate, and that will had been entrusted to James Miller, the lawyer introduced by my uncle. This will clearly states everything. All the inheritance is left to Gina, and she is free to use the mansion as she wishes. That was what was written in the will kept by James. Seeing this, Daniel was shocked and started clinging to me. Please. I've already sold our house and even let go of my parents' home. Why would you do such a thing? Well, actually, It was revealed that Daniel had accumulated a huge debt without my knowledge. He had been frequently visiting nightclubs and spending lavishly while I was busy working. To repay that debt, he had even sold his own house and his parents' home. That's your problem. But Gina, we are husband and wife, right? We are no longer a couple. You have two choices: face charges for forgery or buy the mansion for $3 million. That's impossible. Daniel had just managed to pay off his debts by selling his house and certainly couldn't afford $3 million. His parents were also unable to come up with that amount. Seeing this, I decided to file a police report. Moreover, when I returned to the mansion, I noticed some items were missing. My precious mementos are gone. What is the meaning of this? I confronted Daniel, who replied, "It's not my fault. Mom was planning to sell everything she didn't like." Apparently, his parents had been selling things without my knowledge. This was another case to add to the lawsuit. As a result, Daniel and his parents ended up with massive debts. Of course, they were completely cut off from the company I managed, now led by me, following my mother's footsteps. Amidst all this, Daniel's father shouted, "Bring out that damn daughter-in-law," as he stormed into the company alone. He demanded the withdrawal of the police report and made a scene, eventually being taken away by the police. My uncle and I could only chuckle at this hopeless parent and child. We found out who that lawyer is. He turned out to be Daniel's cousin. Daniel had tried to make me the villain and had forced his cousin to cooperate by exploiting his weaknesses. The cousin, having lost his lawyer license due to the fiasco, harbored resentment against Daniel's family, spreading the word that he had been deceived, leading to their isolation. As a result, I heard Daniel's family was then in a whirlwind of chaos. Seems like a family with a lot of problems. I certainly think so. If they both fail by pulling each other down, that's fine by me. I have no more sympathy for them. So, what are you planning to do with the mansion? Yes, I've decided to sell it. The mansion certainly held dear memories of my mother, but it had been tarnished by Daniel's family. Besides, it was too big for me to live in alone. My uncle said this, supporting my decision, and so I proceeded with the sale of the mansion. Fortunately, a wealthy elderly couple expressed their desire to buy it immediately. I etched the memories of my mother in my heart and decided to leave the mansion. My new life would be in a condo close to the company. Gina. Oh, James. I heard from a colleague and ended up coming here. As I was leaving the office, there stood James. He had been a great help in investigating Daniel's family and gathering evidence. Gradually, we grew closer, influenced by my uncle calling us casually. "Would you like to have some coffee together?" "Of course, let's go," I agreed, and we headed to a nearby cafe. "I'm truly grateful for all the help you've given me, including with my mother's situation." "No, I wanted to be of help to you, Gina," James said, looking at me earnestly. His sudden gaze stirred my heart, but I met his eyes. "Actually, I have feelings for you, Gina." "Really?" "I know you just finished with Daniel, and you might not have sorted out your feelings yet, but please consider it when you're ready." While saying this, he handed me his contact information. I had been aware of his feelings for a while but never saw him in that light. However, now his feelings resonated with me. "I'm serious about this." When he said this, blushing, I found him endearing. I began to think that maybe starting life anew with someone wasn't such a bad idea. Later, Daniel's parents mistook that I was still in the mansion and tried to enter without permission. But the mansion had already been sold to new owners, and they were quickly caught by the advanced security system. Eventually, they received a prison sentence due to their criminal record. "Help me, Gina." I was shocked by the sudden contact from Daniel. I had forgotten to block his number. Such a foolish oversight. Apparently, only Daniel's parents were caught for the break-in, and Daniel had escaped by seeking help elsewhere. However, Daniel was burdened with an overwhelming debt. "But we were once married." I'm appalled at my lack of judgment. I've learned not to be swayed by you. It's time to move on to a new path. Anything else? Gina, let's get back together. Sorry, but that's impossible. Goodbye. After hanging up, I made sure to block Daniel's number. Is everything finished? Yes, it's all over now. Afterward, I decided to respond to James's feelings. Now, we are engaged. My uncle encouraged me, saying, he's truly sincere. Hey, James, I have difficulty conceiving and considering my age. Gina, having you is all that matters to me. Family isn't just about blood relations. His words made me believe that together we could build a happy family. Then, I talked to my uncle about everything, the situation with Daniel, my relationship with James, and about children. I see. If that's your decision, then it's good. Why do you always support me, uncle? That's because of a promise with your father. My uncle explained that my father and he were close friends and always cared for our family. That's why I decided to protect you. I see. You're like a daughter to me, my uncle said with a smile, and I smiled genuinely. I was truly grateful to have him on my side. Be happy. Yes, I definitely will. I vowed to build a happy future, honoring this promise with my uncle. I didn't want to make him worry about me anymore. Afterward, I married James and enjoyed a happy life together. We decided to adopt a child. This child is truly my grandchild, said my uncle, showing warm affection for the child. I am pouring the same love into my child that I received from my mother. He's our child. We'll be okay no matter what happens. Yes, there may be challenges in life ahead, but together, we will surely overcome them. I promise to pass on the lessons I learned from my mother, be a supportive figure like my uncle, and convey pure emotions to my child like James.
Monica is a disappointing child who couldn't even go to college. She is completely different from Linda. It is my mother at home who harshly criticizes me, the older daughter in our family. My father nods in agreement, and my younger sister Linda, understanding that she is being praised, shows a confident and filled smile. My sister attends a prestigious university, and I work with just a high school diploma. My parents proudly praise my sister for her efforts. Why are we so different? I am Monica, 26 years old. I work as a web designer. I was born and raised in a somewhat rural town, living with my grandparents, parents, and sister. My sister Linda is 7 years younger than me, and she was very much adored by the family. Her opinions and whims were often prioritized, which led to me being increasingly neglected. Our parents were never equal in their treatment of us. On Linda's birthday, she would receive expensive gifts, but since my birthday is close to Christmas, it was always celebrated together, and I only received one gift. Furthermore, the gifts were mostly study materials and books, which I had no interest in at the time. When Linda started playing soccer, my parents never missed a week of supporting her at practices and games. I was a member of the tennis club in middle school, but even on my last match before graduating middle school, my parents couldn't come to support me because they had to drive Linda somewhere. Living like this, I always felt a difference between me and my sister. There were days I wanted to cry, but my sister always encouraged me. Whenever our parents compared me and my sister, Linda would say, "It's not like that. Monica is good at studying and teaching, and she can do anything." And after my last match, she said, "Good job," and gave me a small bouquet of flowers she had picked in the park. It seemed that our grandparents also grieved over our parents' attitudes. They would tell my parents to change their behavior towards me and defend me. But my grandmother passed away before I graduated from high school, and soon after my grandfather also passed on. My sister continued to take my side, but it seems that my mother didn't like that. Gradually, my mother began to speak harshly to Linda as well, just like she did to me. If you're going to always side with your sister, you might as well stand outside too. Around the time when the snow began to pile up in the dead of winter, my mother started to threaten us like this. I wanted to avoid involving my sister in such situations, so I had no choice but to tell her. You don't have to take my side anymore." Eventually, Linda stopped defending me and, supported by our parents, she dedicated herself to sports and studies, seemingly enjoying every day. Meanwhile, influenced by the consecutive funerals of our grandparents, our parents told us, "We don't have any savings." And I had no choice but to give up on going to college. I really wanted to study design at university, but that wasn't allowed, and after graduating high school, the only option was to start working right away. However, my desire to be involved in design was strong, and I took an office job at a design company a bit far from my hometown. The company was small and created websites for women's services like hair salons and nail salons. Wanting to study design, I repeatedly asked to do more and was also allowed to serve as an assistant to the designers. Working in the office while learning from professional designers up close was tough at times, but it actually motivated me more each day. My goal to become a web designer grew stronger every day, and studying became the most important time for me. I hardly went back home anymore. Since going home meant just being looked down upon by my parents, I felt it was a hassle. I spent any spare time I found immersed in studying design. On holidays, I used online courses to steadily acquire software skills. This effort finally paid off, and I was welcomed as a member of the design team. My enthusiasm became known to the other designers in the company, and they started introducing me to useful materials and contacts. 3 years later, I was trusted with projects as a full-fledged web designer. 8 years after graduating from high school and working successfully as a web designer, I received news that my sister was going to take the university entrance exams. Surprisingly, she was aiming for the prestigious medical school in a big city. Linda had always maintained top grades due to her hard work, and her acceptance seemed almost certain. Recalling our childhood and how she had supported me, I felt a strong desire to help her in return and offered my support. A few months later, she was accepted into her first-choice medical school. I was genuinely happy for her and congratulated her warmly. "Linda, congratulations on your acceptance. You really worked hard on your exam preparations. I truly admire you." Linda, slightly embarrassed, thanked me, but then she brought up a concern. "I have a little issue. Since it's a private medical school, there seems to be a suggested donation. It's not mandatory, but Dad and Mom are worried about being looked down on as poor if they don't contribute. But just the living expenses and tuition are already costly, so I'm not sure what to do." Linda mentioned she planned to cover her living expenses with part-time jobs, but studying in medical school demands immense dedication. I could easily imagine her struggling to keep up with the vast amount of study required. Although I wanted to help with the donation, it was impossible for my father, a white-collar worker, and my mother, who only worked 2 days a week, to afford such expenses. The tuition for a private medical university itself was a substantial burden on the family finances. It seemed they intended for me to cover the costs. I was surprised that they had asked Linda to request money instead of asking directly themselves. Despite my disdain for my parents' actions, I decided to support my sister and agreed to provide for the donation and other entrance fees. Thus, Linda began living alone in an apartment near the university and started her new life. Her place wasn't too far from mine, so I thought she could rely on me any time. However, perhaps because she was immersed in her college life, her responses to me were rather curt. Still, I would receive messages like, "I want to eat this," or "I need this, please buy it for me." And I would arrange these things for her, supporting her in ways she couldn't ask from our parents. We sometimes ate together, but even then, she was brusque, focusing on her smartphone rather than engaging in conversation with me. "No matter what I say," she insists. Studying is hard. I started to feel bewildered by such responses. Somehow, Linda had become cold towards me. Even today's meal felt as if I had forced her to come out. Trying to change the mood, I brought up our parents in a cheerful tone. "Mom and Dad probably only care about you though, Linda. Suddenly, Linda stared at me intently and snorted lightly. Of course. A medical student like me and a high school graduate designer like you are incomparable. No one cares about a job that doesn't even require qualifications like yours. Her intense tone made my blood run cold. There's no need to say it like that. Just because it's a job that doesn't require qualifications. That's the truth. Being a designer is just a title, and anyone can make a site if they look it up online. It might be better if you had a qualification, but it might be tough for a high school grad like you to get one. It's not that simple. I'm studying and working every day. It's not like you to say such things without knowing. Linda glanced at me displeased and clicked her tongue. Dad and Mom often say that I'm going to a prestigious university and have a promising future, but you didn't even go to college and are a disappointment. I'm only going out to eat with you because our parents told me to. They say, though she's disappointing, make sure Monica doesn't fall any lower. You, the future doctor, should look out for her. Our parents have always compared Linda and me since we were children. Linda is smart, kind, and dependable, while Monica is stupid, clumsy, and can't do anything. Those words that were directly hurled at me resurfaced, and I felt like I was suffocating. My head spun, and I could only bow down and endure it. Seeing me like that, Linda mistook my demeanor for crying, gave a slight smile, said, "I'm going home now," and left. Having moved out and gained the new freedom of living alone, Linda seemed like a completely different person. Surrounded by exceptional people she never met back home, she must fully believe the praises our parents heap on her every day. If our parents say every day that Linda is undeniably a prodigy and she will definitely become a top-class doctor, it's no wonder Linda believes it without a doubt. Those words included a disdainful attitude towards me, which likely led Linda to naturally adopt the same view towards me. This year-end, as usual, I returned home for the holidays. I was asked to return home with Linda, who always had a cold attitude, so we went back together. Linda had been extremely busy with her studies and practical training, and it seemed she hadn't returned home once since starting university. Perhaps because of that, my parents didn't pay any attention to me and were completely focused on Linda. When we arrived home, the table was filled with treats like steak and pizza to welcome her, and in the evening neighbors, relatives, and even Linda's local classmates gathered for a big party. Linda seemed pleased with the atmosphere and began boasting loudly. Mom tells me to come home more often, but my university is that prestigious one, and it's the most difficult medical school, so it's obvious that studying is tough. I'm still a student, but we have many team projects, and I can't just leave them to relax at home. Everyone keeps contacting me whenever something happens, and it really troubles me. I pretended to be cooking in the kitchen and quietly slipped away, but I could hear Linda's loud boasting clearly. To the parents and relatives, it might have been fine, but to the neighbors and her classmates, Linda's boasting probably sounded unpleasant. Perhaps tired of Linda's solo performance, when I brought over some wine, a neighborly old man tried to change the conversation to me. "Aren't you working in design, Monica?" However, Linda and my parents criticized me in unison. "You can't really talk much about her. She's trying, but..." Exactly. She couldn't even go to college and is such a disappointment. She's completely different from her sister. Among the ones gathered, there were many who hadn't gone to college and were working instead. There were people with families and parents with children, but as they were enjoying the feast, everyone refrained from contradicting my mother's words. Only my parents and Linda seemed completely unaware of the situation. I felt awkward and tried to leave without saying anything. However, Linda stopped me. "You still show your face at home a lot, don't you, Monica? I'm doing well in my university studies, so I'm not embarrassed. Maybe you can be so bold, because you don't think about anything." After saying that, Linda burst out laughing loudly. Our parents also laughed back. "If you say that much, it's surely going to hurt her. That's pitiful." Hearing those words, I immediately felt anger rising. "It seems like it's better if I don't come back next year." I got it. I managed to squeeze out those words. Relatives and neighbors looked on with concern, but I put down the tray I was holding and went to get my coat and bag. Linda and the others watched me prepare to leave. I understand everyone's feelings very well. I won't come back to this house anymore. My heart was filled with anger. I felt absolutely nothing towards my sister, just as I did towards my parents. As I said this and left, the three of them waved happily. Don't come back again. While heading to the station, I desperately suppressed the anger inside me. Returning home always made my heart heavy. When I was aspiring to be a web designer, I could distance myself from my parents by using my studies as a reason. However, as I grew older in my career, I felt it was difficult to easily sever the bond with my parents, and I found myself increasingly troubled. Linda is still a university student and young. It might be difficult for her to understand how hard it is to work in society. Still, I think our parents were trying in their own way to raise their children. Even now, Linda is praised as a genius for her academic abilities, and everyone adopts an attitude of looking down on me. Amidst the childish exchanges, I felt anger and was filled with disappointment. If one takes pride in their work, such a relationship should not continue, even with one's parents. I was appalled by Linda's terrible behavior. But this became the moment I decided to cut ties with my family. Months after making this decision, I unexpectedly received a call from Linda. Afterwards, she persistently sent messages asking me to answer the phone. I wasn't blocking her, so I reluctantly answered. "Did you properly pay my tuition?" Linda's voice, speaking slowly to me, had a hint of urgency. I responded calmly. "I paid the donation and the entrance fee before you enrolled. What about this year's tuition? The university has urgently requested that it be paid. I don't know anything about the tuition." Even over the phone, I could sense that Linda was at a loss for words. Indeed, I had drained my savings to provide her with a significant amount of money. I had paid for the entrance fee, donation, and tuition equivalent to 1 year. My savings were almost depleted, and I had planned to pay any further amounts as they came due, so the tuition for the following years remained unpaid. And then there was the incident at the end of the year. It was unbelievable that, after telling me not to come home, they would ask me to pay for tuition. I was asked for a donation, right? I paid the other amounts because I wanted to support you. Didn't Mom and Dad send you to an out-of-state private university because they could afford the tuition? Or did they send you despite not having the money? That's not it. I have many wealthy friends, so there are other expenses besides living costs. Mom and Dad somehow manage those costs. That's why they don't have money for the tuition, so they told me to contact you. In fact, there was a reason I could afford to support Linda's tuition. It was because I had advanced in my career as a designer by switching to a major design company. My achievements as a designer were recognized, and my salary significantly increased. Furthermore, as I continued to be busy with work, I spent little of my salary and bonuses, allowing my savings to grow. I had discussed my job change with my parents, so they probably counted on my financial support from the beginning to advance Linda's education. Once they realized I could support not just the donation but also the tuition, it seems the savings intended for her tuition were spent on her leisure activities. Perhaps I was negligent, but I no longer had the heart to forgive them enough to just provide financial support. Assisting with the tuition wasn't a difficult task, but I refused Linda's request. A few days later, I was contacted by my parents, who demanded payment for the tuition, but I refused again. The urgency and accusatory tone in their voices over the phone further sank my spirits. I felt as though I no longer had a place to return to. They were only interested in my money, not in me as part of the family. Being taken for granted without any consultation was something I could not accept. Linda called almost every day. If there had been a sincere apology, maybe I could have been persuaded to forgive her a bit. However, what I actually heard was, "Please pay the tuition. If you don't, I'll be expelled. Scholarships and part-time jobs aren't enough. It would be a waste if a promising student like me were expelled, right? I'll definitely pay you back once I start working. Please help me as a family." The voicemail was filled with such self-centered words. There were also absurd messages like, "If you're troubled because they told you not to come home, I can try to persuade our parents instead." I saved those messages in a different file and deleted everything from my smartphone. After that, I sent Linda a message and blocked her phone number. No one would want to be treated by someone who only talks down to others just because they are family. This is how I completely cut off communication with my family and was able to welcome a new spring. I heard from one of the relatives that Linda somehow managed to pay for her second year's tuition with scholarships and loans from relatives. However, unable to receive living expense support anymore, Linda started working part-time. But with the immense amount of studying and exams and practical training, working part-time was harder than she thought, and she ended up dropping units and had to leave university 6 months later. I had been supporting both her tuition and sending money home, but I stopped the remittances last year when I cut ties. With my financial support gone and living on the edge, my parents now had Linda, who had dropped out of college, back home. Although Linda was academically capable, there was no money at home to consider transferring to another university. Yet she did not work locally but instead became reclusive, immersing herself in video games daily and lashing out in stress. At night, I heard from a friend who lives nearby that the sounds of family arguments are always audible. My parents seem unable to say anything to the daughter they once doted on. When I met my parents by chance outside, they looked utterly exhausted, and it seems that neighbors, perhaps out of awkwardness, hardly speak to them. One day, perhaps due to stress, my father caused an incident. While on his way to work on the train, he groped a woman next to him and was caught by other passengers and taken away by the police. Fortunately, a settlement was reached and he was not charged, but this incident forced him to resign as it was already being talked about at his workplace, and he felt uncomfortable staying. My mother had to start working, but having only part-time job experience before, it was difficult for her to find a job that could provide a significant income. My parents tried to reach out to me through relatives at times. However, their messages were always self-centered and commanding. Eventually, the relatives, tired of my parents' attitudes, told me, "We'll handle things smoothly here, don't worry," and stopped relaying their messages to me. I have finally severed all ties with my family home and am now able to live a settled life. I heard that, in addition to my reclusive sister Linda, my unemployed father has developed a poor reputation, and rumors have spread in the neighborhood, leading to them being shunned even more than before. My mother, frustrated with the situation, seems to have gone somewhere. Now, I'm told that no one can get in touch with her. Left behind, my father and Linda do not work and are living a life almost akin to homelessness. Had they valued their neighbors even slightly, they might have received some warm comfort, but given their past actions, help from those around them is virtually non-existent. I am successfully building my career in the field of design. I have been selected to participate in a major project and am scheduled to be involved in work that will leave my name known. This has motivated me to finally pursue a long-held goal, taking the university entrance exams. With sufficient savings and the current project wrapping up, I plan to start studying for the exams seriously. I also have plans to study business management, as I consider going independent in the future. With this new challenge ahead, my heart is racing with anticipation.